Welcome to the Acquisition HQ podcast, where we interview founders who are seasoned operators of companies anywhere between 2 to 50 million in EBITDA, individuals that are looking to deploy capital, private equity, VC, as well as we also have M&A service providers who are looking to help us and individuals who are wanting to buy and sell companies. Today we're joined with a serial entrepreneur, Damon Deru, and a product leader with a track record of founding, acquiring, and scaling companies across fintech, SaaS, and emerging technologies. He has built and exited multiple software ventures, including leading the acquisition of Advisor Peak by Addepar in 2021. Today, Damon operates at the intersection of product scale and strategy as a CPO, managing partner, and active investor. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks, Nathan.
You know, there's one other thing I want to add there is you are also a founding member of the Acquisition HQ Network.
I am, yep.
We are honored to have you today on the podcast and learn a little bit more about some of the experiences that you have with both buying companies and selling companies, as well as running companies and the intricacies that they may have.
Absolutely.
So let's dive right into it.
Okay.
How did you get started in your entrepreneurial career?
So I started my first company, a company by the name of Trade Warrior, back in 2008. So I started my career actually as a registered investment advisor, and just a kid out of college, went to the U, and went to work for a local investment advisory firm while I was still going to school, and they put me in charge of the trading at the firm. We managed about 500 client households, about 150 million in assets at the time. And at first I thought that was like a really cool job. I'm like, hey, they're putting me in charge of all the trading. Trading $150 million as a 20-year-old kid was pretty cool. But I quickly learned why I got that job. It's because we were using Excel spreadsheets to figure out and calculate all of our trades because we wanted to trade our clients tax efficiently. And having 500 households, using Excel, we would go through each one, and it takes about 3 months to go through the whole trading process. By the time we were done, we'd turn right around and start the process over. And I was like, this is crazy in this day and age. We should have software that does this for us. I couldn't find anything in the market, so I went to my father-in-law, who's a computer programmer, and said, hey, could you help us build a program that can help us do our trading a lot faster than Excel spreadsheets? And so we went to work on a program. Initially, it was built in Microsoft Access, of all things. It was just meant to be an internal application at our firm. And we took that process that used to take us 3 months down to about a week using that program. So yeah, huge time savings. And again, initially we weren't looking to commercialize it. We were just building it for our own internal use. At the time, we were working with TD Ameritrade, who was later acquired by Schwab. And I was talking to my rep one day and telling about this program we had built, and he invited me to speak at their national conference panel. They had a panel on trading. And so I went and spoke at the panel. Afterwards, I had all these advisors coming up to me offering to buy a copy of this program we had built. And so that basically what spawned in us the idea, like, hey, let's take this kind of internal application and go commercialize it. And so in 2008, I left the advisory industry, launched Trade Warrior, and we went to work on taking that prototype program we had built and commercializing it. 2008, if you remember, was a really, really tough year to be starting a software company, let alone one in fintech with the 08, 09 turn down. Fortunately, we started about 6 months before the actual crash happened. So we were able to raise like $500,000 in seed funding just through kind of friends and family. And that basically sustained us for that initial creation period. So like from 2008 to 2010, I hired a developer. The two of us basically just locked ourselves in an office for 2 years and built this program. And so we launched in 2010. It was interesting because at that point we were out of money, but we had the product done. And so, but 2010 was still a really, really tough time to raise capital, particularly as a first time, I was still in my early 20s, hadn't ever started a company before. Again, the economic environment was terrible. So anyways, long story short, after, we were unsuccessful raising any capital, I finally went to my grandparents, who were the most conservative people in the world, having gone through, the tail end of the Great Depression, and somehow convinced them to lend me $75,000 and that basically is what gave us just enough capital to survive and kind of bootstrap our way out of it. Kind of fast forwarding, we took that company, we ended up merging it with another company in 2017 out of Chicago. And then about a year later, I relaunched a very similar company called Advisor Peak. I felt like there was still innovation that needed to happen in that space, and so we relaunched basically the same software company, doing focusing on trading and rebalancing software for investment advisors, and we ran that until 2021 when we were acquired by one of our partner firms, Addepar, out of New York City. They're a huge fintech, not a household name by any stretch, but it's a system that a lot of investment advisors and brokers and whatnot use behind the scenes. Currently, they have about $7 trillion in assets running through their platform, just to give you some perspective.
It's incredible.
I'd
be curious about the development of that second company.
Yeah.
What was it called again?
It was called Advisor Peak.
So let's dive into Advisor Peak. Did you have anyone that was a part of the organization that you had to take on for like employees and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. So the good part was, having kind of been in the industry through my first venture, I actually recruited several of my employees from my former company, several of the same developers, and just some other industry people I'd met along the way, including luring a couple of key guys away from some of our primary competitors, which was huge. These guys had just tons of experience, and they were just looking for something that was more, I guess getting back to the startup culture, if you will, versus kind of more the big established, corporate culture. And so we were able to lure away a couple of our, like I said, some key guys away from some competitors, and we relaunched. And it's interesting because the first venture, like I said, we launched in 2008, and it took us until 2017 to be acquired. And then our second go around was 2018 to 2021. What was really interesting is we actually started getting acquisition offers 6 months after we launched. Like, we were still brand new. And I think we had 3 or 4 acquisition offers before we finally ended up selling in 2021. So
when you initially started the second company, did you know that there was an acquisition that was evident, or that would, in essence, be where you guys were heading?
That was the intent of it, actually, at the time. Again, it's a very niche software. I mean, you're talking trading software built for investment advisors. So there's only 3 or 4 companies in the industry doing what we were doing, and most of them had been acquired at that point. I think there was us and one other one when we launched that hadn't been acquired. Since then, both of us were acquired. So actually as it stands right now, every single company in that space has been acquired by a bigger company. And so that was our thought, and our intent was, hey, we still feel like there's room for growth and improvement here, and nobody's tackling it. And it's a very complex piece of software to build and develop. It's not easy. Several companies have tried and failed. And so we felt like, hey, there's innovation left on the table here. Let's go do this again. And we did have that belief that, hey, if we build it, one of these bigger companies is going to want to pick this up and merge us into their technology. So what would you suggest other founders out there to do in order to create a company that's worth acquiring? I mean, one of the big things I think, and Warren Buffett talks about this all the time, is looking for companies with a moat around them. And so that was something that I've tried to focus on and develop, is, generally having a company with a moat around it. And in our case, this was a very niche piece of software that was very difficult to develop. And I think there's opportunities like that almost in every industry. It's just keeping your eyes open for those pain points that people are looking at, but also, if you've got a unique skill set, around that, it can be enormous in just terms of building that moat. That how hard would it be for somebody else to come in and replicate this and knock off what you're doing? So maybe another case and example of that is I invested in a company after we sold Advisor Peak. Me and a couple of the founding partners of that company launched another company called Control Core. I'm just an investor in that company. I'm not running the day-to-day, but one of our partners was a general contractor here in Utah, and he had been in my ear for years about how terrible the accounting software for construction general contractors is. And so we launched a company called Control Core to basically rebuild QuickBooks, a QuickBooks version of it, is one that is focused on the construction industry. And so again, we were focusing on a very niche piece of software that's, my other partner, he has a lot of experience and had a lot of ideas on how to fix it. He has both a construction background and a CPA background. And so, he had a lot of really good ideas on how to actually fix this problem. And again, it's a problem that's going to be it's very difficult to solve. We've been working on it for 4 years and just launched about 9 months ago. And again, not saying that somebody couldn't come and replicate it. Everything's replicatable, but it'd be very hard for somebody to come in and, tomorrow and rebuild what we built that, spend the last 3-4 years building. So,
I'd ask you to walk me through the process and put my mind in your mind as an investor when you're looking to make an investment or an acquisition for that matter.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the drivers that you look at, and what not to invest in as well.
Yeah. I think what not to invest in is just as important, right? And so, and I think, and maybe this is a good segue. We can talk about, everything's not a success out in the business world. So, me and a partner acquired just a local retail business here about 14 months ago called Kangaroo Zoo, which is a kids' family entertainment center. And we did buy it. It was my first acquisition, one, in a retail space. So it was my first experience there. But two, it was kind of my first acquisition is just purely, getting into the world of buying quote unquote boring businesses that are cash flowing. And so that was our intent behind it. And again, maybe going against what I was just barely talking about of a business with a moat, like this is a business with no moat, like really anybody can go launch, a kids entertainment center. It's pretty easy to do that. However, like we weren't necessarily looking at it from that perspective. We were looking at it more from hey, this is a business that's been around for 18 years. It's, historically been very cash flow positive. And so, we ended up acquiring it. But, I think a couple of hard lessons learned there. We're actually, spirit of full disclosure, we're actually in the process of selling it as we speak. 14 months later, we're selling it at a loss. We haven't made a profit on it in the last 14 months. And so, as me and my partner have looked back, we're like, okay, what lessons can we learn from this? Like we basically made a bad investment in this case. And I think one of the factors, or a couple of the factors we ignored there is one, this is a space that both of us didn't have any experience in, and so, and not to say you can't change industries or switch, but, where my entire background and experience is in finance and software, and that's where all my other investments and ventures are, and those are all going well. This is my first time I ventured into retail and got a real rude awakening to the retail side of the world. And so I think that was one factor. Another factor was that we ignored, and that, to our detriment was, we were so focused on just looking at the company fundamentals, and researching from that aspect that we weren't looking at the broader economic picture. Okay. A business like Kangaroo Zoo is on the fringe of people's discretionary income, and a lot of people have been fighting the inflationary pressures of the last few years. Wages have not kept up, and so for instance, if you're a parent who's barely getting by, you're going to have your kid's birthday party at Kangaroo Zoo this year, or you're just going to go to the local park and do it for free, and that's kind of what we found out over the last years. I think we bought the business at the wrong time from an economic perspective, and that's where we've been struggling. And so, and then there's also just sometimes factors that are completely outside of your control. Like the last 2 winters have been really, really mild here in Utah. It was 60 degrees in Christmas, a couple of weeks ago. And so, there's sometimes factors in business that are completely out of your control. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's kind of what we fought in this business is, we've been fighting the weather, we've been fighting the economy, things that are outside of our control. That we didn't, obviously you can't predict the weather, but, we did have an idea on the economic picture that we ignored when we bought this business. So anyway, some hard lessons learned on that one.
I think that's extremely valuable. It's just one, looking at obviously the market in that area, but also, like you said, there are areas out of your control, but areas that were under your control, like understanding the industry and making sure to continue to do what you do best.
Yeah.
Well, so that's word to the wise right there, is just make sure that you're investing in industries that or at least have somebody that knows that industry in and out.
Yeah, agreed.
Subject matter expert.
Yeah, and then like I said, don't ignore where are we at on the economic cycle either. Mm-hmm. I think, again, I'll reference Warren Buffett because I'm a huge follower of his, and he's the greatest investor that ever lived. But he's very patient, right? Like, so he's waiting for that right time in the market and the economy to buy things cheap, and so sometimes, like, I think it's worthwhile, like, if we're in a market that's really hot, and valuations are really high, like sometimes it pays just to sit back and just be patient and wait. for the right time. And that, I think that's, in our case, that's something we were ignoring. We were so focused on the company fundamentals that we weren't we ignored the where are we at in the economy. So
let's talk about due diligence.
Yeah.
And the process that you typically have. Everyone has a different process, but
Yep.
there are some fundamentals that you typically have to follow. But I'd be curious on your perspective there on due diligence.
I think due diligence is so incredibly important. I think one of the best things anybody could do is as they're getting into this line of looking to acquire businesses or even just invest, is get involved in the right networks. There's networks like we're involved in here that is just a great foundation of people buying and selling businesses. Plus, like I said, all the service providers, all the M&A providers, SBA bankers, like just having that network, that ecosystem that you can rely on and go back to. My experience has been I'm in multiple networks like this, and the feedback you can get from that network is just so incredibly valuable. And my experience so far has been everybody has been incredibly willing to help. So you can take your deal to the group, and again, maybe you got to redact out the name of the company or whatever you're looking at, but like, hey guys, here's the financials, here's the industry they're in. Get that feedback from the group. I think that's incredibly valuable. Part of that also is coming up with a really, really good due diligence list. Make sure that you're actually going through and getting all of that. And again, there's tons of resources both in these networks, but even just go out to the internet and look. But make sure you actually take the time to do that due diligence process. A couple other quick thoughts is, one, if you're going through the SBA is a great way to kind of vet your deal because they're extremely conservative. And so if they don't approve your deal, that's usually a pretty good indication that, you're probably missing something or the deal's not valued right or whatever. And so that I think can be actually a free resource that you can use. Kind of going back to what I was just maybe talking about with Warren Buffett too, is like, I think it pays to be patient and wait until that right deal comes along. I think with, for instance, our acquisition of Kangaroo Zoo, looking back, I don't think like we missed anything major on the due diligence in terms of like the company or anything like that. But was it the very best deal we could have found? I don't think so. I think if we would have been more patient and just kept waiting and looking, we would have found a better deal out there. Again, so we weren't necessarily looking to acquire a kids family entertainment center. In fact, that wasn't even in our realm, when we first stumbled across it, but I think, again, in retrospect, we should have been more patient, just waited and watched until the right deal came along. It's kind of like when you're looking to buy a car, right? Like you start researching that market and you start getting a really good sense for, the value of the car you're looking for. And then when the right car comes along, you're aware of it. And you can move fast and jump on that deal. So that'd be my other thing too, is like, yes, be cautious and be patient, but also like, I've seen a lot of like getting in these networks and whatnot. There's been guys that have been looking for deals for 6-7 years as well. And it's just like, they get so caught up in the analysis side of things that when the right deal does come along, they don't jump on it and move. So like I'd also caution, like, don't get caught in that mode where you're so overly conservative. Like if you're in there researching the market constantly, and like you'll get a very good feel for, hey, that right deal pops up. Like when that happens, like be ready to move and move fast, because you're not going to be the only one seeing that deal most likely.
We know that every deal is a little bit different,
as
you know, and you just touched on. I'd be curious, and I would assume my audience would be as well, how you strategically structure a term sheet. And I know there's, again, fundamentals that you're going to place into a term sheet. But how do you typically approach that systematic approach?
And I'm actually glad you asked this question, because I think that's one of the awesome things with buying and selling businesses is you can get really creative with the term sheets and with the deal structures, just depending upon the buyer and the seller and what kind of business it is. And so we've structured some really unique deals, and so I can kind of maybe talk about a couple of them. So. Going back to the Kangaroo Zoo deal, like that was, I'd call a very traditional deal. So what we did there is we ended up doing a mix of an SBA loan, a seller note, and then me and my partner came up with the rest, in cash as a down payment. And so, that very traditional deal structure there, we did have to incorporate a seller note into it because the SBA would only lend us so much. And so we went back to the seller and said, hey, like, you're going to have to basically do a seller note for the other portion. So, that's a very typical deal structure. We did another acquisition this last summer of a company down in Texas. And this kind of gets back into the world that I came from. It was actually one of my former clients. So it was an off-market deal. It was just one of my clients. I'd always been very intrigued by his business, and I just stayed in touch with him over the years. And it took about 18 months of me talking to him to basically talk him into selling his business to us. But what they do is they do trade outsourcing for investment advisors. So instead of an investment advisor doing their own trading or hiring a back office trader, they can hire us and we'll do the trading for their firm. Like they'll give us their investment models and whatever else. And we have a team of traders spread out across the country that'll go do the trading. So I've always been very intrigued by this guy's business model. He's the only one in the country doing it. And so, but with that deal, it was really unique where he wanted a valuation for the company that couldn't be justified given the current revenues and cash flows. And so basically how we structured that deal was we did an upfront cash payment to buy 90% of the business. And then the last 10% we structured as a future option. So he has the option to basically say, okay, like in 5 years, either I'll keep my equity because the company's doing so well, or I'm going to exercise this option. You guys got to pay me this chunk of cash. And so we're basically using his business to finance the future price. And that's how we were able to finally come to terms, because he wanted a price that couldn't be justified today. But we're like, okay, we're going to use your business to build that up, and we'll pay you out on the back end. And so you can get really creative with the deal structures.
Did you receive any liquidity? You said 90% that you still had to come up with on that one.
Yeah, so it was 90%, but don't think of it as 90% in terms of the cash. So we paid basically a small down payment portion, and then really the bulk of his payment's going to come at the end of it. And if for some reason we can't meet that in 5 years, then it reverts back, and we just take our initial down payment. We keep a small equity piece in his company, and he gets the company back. So that was basically the risk we're taking on that deal. But again, it was I like that deal. I like bringing that up because it's an example of like how you can get really creative in your deal structures with buyers and sellers. Particularly, like I said, if you don't have the SBA involved, like the sky's the limit. You can really structure a deal, as creatively as you want between you and the seller. So
risk mitigation. I think we should touch on that as well in your perspective as you start walking through this case study that we're starting to unfold.
Yeah.
What are some areas of risk mitigation that you typically look at within deals?
I think that's really important. So, I think just going back to these two deals that we're talking about. So let's go in reverse. So the deal down in Texas that we acquired, this trading company, I actually really like this deal because we're not, in terms of risk mitigation, I think we structured it really favorably on our side. There's almost no risk in the deal for us because, like I said, we're basically structuring it so that, yes, we're paying this guy this option, say in 5 years if everything works out. Mm-hmm. But we also structured in the case that if this doesn't work out, like if the business doesn't grow like we think it's going to grow, and we can't pay this guy this chunk of money at the end of it, and it reverts back so where he retakes ownership of the company for the most part. But we still protected our initial investment in the sense that converts to X% of equity in the company still. So as me and my partners looked at it, we're like, this is like pretty much the most risk-free deal we could structure. Like really, there is no risk in this deal for us. But on the flip side, so one thing I did want to bring up is like, let's go back to the Kangaroo Zoo deal. This is the first deal I've ever done in my life where we took on debt. So we have the SBA loan, we have the seller note. And in this case, the business hasn't worked out over the last year. And like I said, we're actually in the process of putting it back up for sale right now. But it's been maybe a little bit of a rude awakening to me where every other business I've ever started, the worst case was you could shut down and walk away at any point, and all you're out is whatever you put into it, capital, time, etc. But you can walk away scot-free pretty much, unless you've taken on debt. The second you take on debt, you're on the hook, whether things work out or not, both with the SBA note and our seller note, but then also, being a retail location, we had to sign personal guarantees on 2 leases on these, huge 15,000 square foot facilities as well. And so, it's been, I just maybe caution people that once again, like as you're looking at deals and going that route, like, that if you're going to take on debt in the deal, like just realize that like if the business doesn't work out in that case, like it can take you down personally. Like if you don't have the means to get out of it, that could potentially bankrupt you versus like starting a new business and just, either using your own capital or investor capital. You don't have that same level of risk. So definitely something to think about as you're going down this path and structuring your deals and deciding whether you're going to take on debt or not.
You and I have seen the advancement of ETA, and the desire for people to want to buy companies.
Yep.
And it's starting to become a little bit more mainstream. There's some pros and cons to that as far as the mainstream being able to start, seeing that more.
Yeah.
What are some words of advice that you would give that maybe that people haven't heard yet, within the ETA space that you've literally gone through? I know you just touched on a detailed scenario there, but is there anything else?
Yeah, no, I think the growth of ETA is really good and positive for everybody, right? Like, I was involved with a company over the last couple of years where we were advising business owners and basically helping them prep to get their business ready to sell. And what's super interesting with that is, as we went out and started talking to a lot of small business owners, was that most business owners don't have the realization that they can actually sell their business. It's actually a shame if you look at how many businesses just close. We were talking to a local auto body shop just here in downtown Salt Lake, just an example. And I think they were doing $3 million in revenue, and the guy was getting ready to retire. And his whole game plan was, I'm just going to slowly wind the business down over the next couple of years. And we went to him and we're like, no, you can sell this business. People want to buy this business. And he was just shocked. So I think the growth of the ETA industry in general is going to be really good for everyone, because it will, I think, help wake up business owners, hopefully, to the fact that, hey, you can sell your business. And so, but with that, maybe the downside is there's more competition for the deals, because more and more people are seeing this opportunity, incredible opportunity really over the next 5 to 10 years, is the kind of the last wave of the baby boomers look to exit their businesses. And so, I think, from that aspect, it's bad, because now you've got all this additional competition looking at the same deals. And so, the best deal you could possibly find is going to be the off-market deal. But those are also the hardest deals to find and source. But that's where I would encourage people, like, use your network, and don't be afraid just to go out and talk to people. Again, go to just not even necessarily ETA networking groups, but just go to general business networking groups and just put yourself out there as somebody that buys and sells and invests in businesses. And you'll be surprised at like what comes out of the woodwork. And you can get access to that off-market deal without all the competition of the other buyers. So, that'd be my one piece of advice for people looking is, again, if you can find those off-market deals, just network the best you can, and don't be afraid to reach out to business owners. If there's a business you come across that looks really interesting, because a lot of these guys have never had an offer on their business. And so if you just reach out to the blue and say, hey, I really like your business and I'd be interested in buying it when the time's right, like, get that conversation going. And it might take a couple of years to kind of cultivate that, but again, that could lead to your best deal you ever do.
Let's talk legal structure and how you place the asset in or underneath a holdco function, or how do you specifically structure your acquisition?
So I've got everything separated. Again, this is coming back to, I just follow my lawyer's advice here. So everything is separated, but we do have holdcos. So just as an example, like under the Kangaroo Zoo, we have a holdco, but then we set up each location as its own LLC as well, that are both wholly owned by the holdco. And there's lots of reasons to do that. One, probably the biggest one is just liability. Like, if someone goes into one facility and gets hurt and sues it and takes it down, you don't end up crashing your whole business. But it's also been kind of nice that we've gone into the sale process that actually both are set up as separate LLCs. And so if somebody wants to come along and just buy one of our two locations, like, we can easily, it's already partitioned off and we can easily do that. So longer term, so like all my other business investments right now, they're all individual. My longer term goal is to move more into a holdco type strategy. That's my long term game plan right now, and why I've made multiple investments in different entities. Right now, I'm managing and running it all just by myself. My eventual goal is to be able to have some managers that can help manage that holdco portfolio.
Because that's the asset, and then you have all these other assets that are off of the control, in essence. I've seen that structure pretty popular. Obviously, that's one of, not the only structures, but it's one of the main ways that you do it. Yeah, man, there's so much we could dive into. I think that, based on an understanding of what you have gone through, what you're currently going through, and is there anything that you're excited about? Now flipping into the future and starting to establish kind of your next steps forward. Can you share with us what you're excited about?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, I do feel like we're, at the verge, and I know everybody's talking about this, but just, the revolution of AI over the last, year or two has really come on the scene. And so that's something we're looking at and watching very closely. How can we, take advantage of that in the companies that we own to get more efficient? So, just an example of that is I'm also part owner in a company called Broodstack, where we have a 60-man development team in India. And so, being in the software development world, AI is awesome, but it's also very scary, as owning an outsourced software development shop, because now you've got apps like Lovable and these different things where you can just kind of go in there and anybody out the street, go vibe code an app and launch it without hiring a developer, So, but on the flip side, there's also a ton of amazing tools there as well that can help speed up our development. So that's one, we're just looking at like how can we integrate AI to make our portfolio companies way more efficient. But we're also taking a really hard look again, because I'm not just stuck solely in the acquisition world, but also I have a long history of launching companies, and so we're looking at what can we launch around this as well? Because I do feel like we're at this, this crux of history, kind of like, when the internet came on or when the App Store first showed up. How many of us have kicked ourselves for not jumping on that and starting a company back, the early days of the internet, or like I said, when the Apple App Store came along, like how, some of those first apps got just massive traction because they were, some of the first apps. And so we're looking at that. We feel like we're at that same precipice with AI right now. And so, but again, the question is, what do you launch around that? And so there's a lot of ideas, and I'd say encourage people, just look in the industry, look at the problems you're facing. And is there a product that AI can maybe help solve that you could actually launch and create? And so just one example of that, again, we're kind of in the software development world. And so one of the big things we're always dealing with our clients that hire us to do software development is getting good product requirements out of them. Because, if you get bad product requirements, you give that to the developers, they develop it, then you give it to the client, and they're like, oh, this is all messed up, we got to go back and change it. That's a very expensive process for both us and the client. And so, one of my partners, he's like, hey, this is a real world problem we're facing. Like, this is something AI can actually help us with. And so we've been developing internally a product management tool that, as our clients, send over their feature requests or their bug fix or whatever, it will analyze that and basically help root out, is there a gap in the requirements? Or is there discrepancies in the same requirement? Is a missing documentation we need? So it'll give all that feedback and kick it back to the client before we even look at it, and then go through multiple iterations until the AI basically says, hey, good job, this looks good. And so we've been working and kind of testing that internally, and basically we're in the process now where we're going to take over the next few months and actually launch a new product company around that product that we're developing. So I would just encourage people, like, look at the industry you're in. What are some real world problems you're facing? And and maybe there's an idea around AI that you could even go launch to solve a very specific problem. And I think we're early enough that, there's all these opportunities to go do that where there's not already, 20 different competitors already doing it. So,
yeah, I see that to be true, certainly in the M&A space as well, with financial analysis.
Yeah.
And the various tools that are allowing us to understand things almost in an instant. That our AI Autobots can look at.
Yeah, I agree.
As well as valuation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And having these various scorecards that, obviously every business is going to go through right now. So in essence, the entire industry of business is going to be converting to AI.
Yeah.
In every system.
Well, and I mean, there's a business idea, right? Like I haven't come across an app yet that, and maybe, like I said, maybe they're out there, but yeah, I mean, doing financial analysis, maybe something to scour all the due diligence and find out, hey, is there something, because I mean, especially in the due diligence process, sometimes you're bombarded with hundreds of pages of documentation, and let's be honest, it's mind numbing to go through all that, whereas AI can cruise through that in an instant. So
well, your data rooms, you're getting so many, like you said, documents, and if you just have, in essence, the AI that just scans the entire process of every data
Yeah.
room and every folder that
Yep.
does, certain things, and then it's going to be fun.
It's going to be
I can
fun.
tell you
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. The efficiency gains are awesome. And like I said, I think there's opportunity everywhere right now. It's just looking for it and identifying it, and, and again, making sure that you're going after the idea with the best opportunities, that'd be the trick there, is like, take the time to do a little product market research and figure out, like, before you go down a road of either building something or buying something, like, hey, is there really a fit for this before I go down that road? So,
Well, I can tell you're a builder. You love building. That's for
Yep,
sure.
absolutely.
And obviously, it's gotten you to a point where now you're in a position of investor looking at various deals, but
Yeah.
also having that mindset, that attitude to continue to develop and also
Absolutely.
inspire. And that's why you came on the podcast today, just to inspire our next generation and those out there. So, what would be the lasting words of wisdom that you'd like to give our audience about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there's so much to learn and do. I mean, there's no way getting around just getting involved and getting your hands dirty. And I mean, that you can go to school, you can read, you can learn. The best thing you can do is just get your hands dirty with business. Life and business is going to teach you the hardest lessons. We both learned that along the way. But I also feel like that's, again, just going back to the maybe the advocacy for getting involved in these networking groups like ours. We've got an incredible network of resources that can help people avoid a lot of those mistakes that, like, we've all made along the way. And just rely on the wisdom of that group. There's so much, and like I said, everyone I've ever met has just been so incredibly helpful and willing to help. So yeah, that'd probably be the best advice I can give anybody, is like, don't try and do this alone. Get involved, learn from those around you, ask for help. Don't be prideful. Like, if you got a deal or you're stuck on something, or even if you're running a business and you're stuck and got problems, like, take it to the group and say, this is what I'm dealing with. Because the wealth of the group and the networking power of the group, some guys might be like, hey, I've dealt with this before, here's how I got out of it. Or, hey, I know somebody that I think might be able to help you in this case. So yeah, just get involved and network as much as possible.
Well, you heard it. Damon Deru here, serial entrepreneur. We're excited for your future and what is to come.
Likewise, for
and
you
then
guys.
also, we've got quite a few things going on.
Yep.
If you guys want to be more involved, obviously, with our network, or just making sure that you do your research, we've got many ways you can do that. First, you can go to acquisitionhq.co, and that's our page that has information about the upcoming councils that'll be launching this year, 2026, as well as our national conference called AquaCon, which we're thrilled to have in March 26th, as well as in September. But, at the end of the day, it was an honor having you on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Hope you guys enjoyed. And if you want to have more content just like this, feel free to comment below. And we can't wait to see you on the next podcast.